All right, good morning, everyone. We will get started in just a minute, okay? Go ahead and please put your name into the chat so I know that you're here. Thank you.
Here, this is the ninth. So it should be the one before that.
Am I on? Will y'all see me? Yeah.
Share.
All right, good morning. We are going to go ahead and get started. All right, so today we are going to go over advocacy and legal remedies for sexual assault survivors. So a few of the objectives will be, we will be defining what advocacy is and what it looks like as a victim advocate, and also what are some legal remedies that survivors have the right to. such as what their rights are as a victim of crime, the Crime Victims Compensation Program, and the Address Confidentiality Program. So how do we define advocacy? So there's several different parameters that as a rape crisis center, we do have to support when it comes to advocacy. Advocacy is actually defined as providing assistance on behalf of survivors, as well as understanding that we are supporting them in their needs, okay? It's very imperative that we are victim-centered. So that means that we are here for the survivor, okay? And our role is just to listen to what that survivor's needs are and to guide them based on facts, not our opinions, okay? There are 3 key steps when we're talking about victim-centered advocacy, all right? And that includes, number 1, we have to check in with the survivor, okay? What do they want? What are their needs? What are their concerns? Okay, so when you first are introducing yourself, possible for hospital accompaniment, listen to them, okay? Don't try to pressure them. Listen to what their needs are, their fears, their frustrations, what are the concerns they have. Number 2, we have to inform them of what their options are. For instance, they have the option to report or not. So make sure that they understand what those options are, okay? Even if you are receiving medical attention, there's certain things that you do not have to do. The same goes across for any kind of medical procedures. They do have to consent. Same rights apply for services for survivors, okay? So just inform them of what those options look like, okay? Sometimes we do have to act on a survivor's behalf, okay? Now, this is only if the survivor actually gives explicit consent to be able to do that, but understand that that's the party advocacy where we are supporting the survivor and their needs and helping to facilitate that process. So the key understanding when we are defining advocacy that it's all
Zoom
about
link.
being
Did you get
able
the
to
email?
empower the survivor by providing support or
Mhm.
information or assistance.
I am. Oh,
Okay. So what are the different types of advocacy services? So this is just going to be a brief introduction. We are going to go into each of these a little deeper later on. But as I mentioned, as a rape crisis center, we do have to provide certain direct supportive assistance. Number 1, accompanying survivors. So this means that we actually must provide in-person support at medical exams, law enforcement offices, prosecutors' offices. Sometimes when they're conducting interviews, a survivor may want a victim advocate present, and of course, court proceedings, okay? Your role is also to provide preparation for or information about those meetings. So what are the things that are going to be expected, maybe possibly during a SANE exam? What should be expected if a survivor chooses to file a police report, okay? Sometimes what are the type of questions that maybe an investigator may ask or detective may ask, understanding what those interviews consist of, meetings, and of course also court proceedings, okay? Your role is also to explain those options and the legal process. So later on, we will actually be going over the entire criminal justice systems and policies and procedures so that you are educated in that process. But your role is to make sure survivors understand what their rights and their choices are. Like survivors do not have to participate in prosecuting an offender if they don't feel comfortable doing so, for example. So the understanding is they do have that right to participate or not. And so being able to let them know, especially if they are indecisive about what they really want, our role is just to provide those options, okay? In addition, we do have to assist with certain basic needs. So that may mean that we may have to provide transportation. Sometimes we provide clothing. For instance, if we do accompany to a hospital and they do keep their clothing as evidence, sometimes providing that clothing so they have something to go home in, and then of course, referrals for shelter if needed. Your role is also to provide and help them understand what the Crime Victims Compensation Program is, how to apply, what are the parameters of the program, okay, and how it may benefit them as well. And then, of course, providing empathetic, non-judgmental emotional support. Does not matter what the survivor's choice is. We want to be empathetic all across the board in every conversation that we have, okay? We need to make sure that we are helping survivors navigate that trauma with compassion, okay? Reminder that we talked about survivors do react in different ways. So being able to hold composure and still deliver that empathetic care. Okay. With the survivor's consent, you can also follow up with the survivor based on agency's policy. As you know, our policy here is to ensure that our outreach department does follow up. It is on the back of the brief interview intake that you complete. And so that is given as an option if they want follow-up. We will not follow up with them if they do not give us that consent. Okay? Just a minute, you guys. Okay. All right. All right. So now your role also is to provide that system navigation. So how do we help survivors navigate through certain systems to include legal, medical services, and then, of course, access to counseling services, okay? We will assist them with the crime victims compensation, understanding that process, as well as if they're needing financial assistance or even other advocacy organizations. So what can an advocate do and what an advocate does not do? So of course, we talked about that empathetic service, giving practical and informational assistance about what is available to survivors. We need to listen to them. So ensure that they feel heard at every step of the way, okay? Empower them, help them understand that this is no one else's choice but yours. You have complete control over your body, complete control over your decisions, without any pressure. Your role also is to link them to certain resources. So that is why we have, like, for instance, in our packets that we provide those referrals and or even a referral guide, resource guide that can help them along the way. And then, very important, to validate. We are not investigators, okay? It is not our role to determine if they are telling the truth or not. Our job is to listen and validate their concerns, okay? Providing that non-judgmental support, okay? An advocate does not make decisions for the survivor. So sometimes you may be asked, what should I do, right? And you just will go back to informing them, well, these are your rights. I can't make that decision for you. How are you feeling about it? Tell me what your concerns are. You can help walk them through the process, but we cannot make the decisions for them. Okay, we cannot pressure or persuade them because, oh, I really feel you really need to report, Okay, we cannot do that. Okay. We also have to we cannot provide legal advice. Okay. We are not legal attorneys. Okay. In this agency, we do not have any legal attorneys, so we cannot provide legal advice. Okay. You can walk them through the legal processes of things. That's that informational piece, but we cannot give legal advice, okay? And we also can't act as a therapist, okay, unless you're licensed to do so, okay? The main thing is to understand that an advocate's role is to stand beside the survivor, not direct their path in which way they should go. So when we're breaking down medical, legal, and crisis setting, when it comes to medical, we do provide hospital accompaniment. So this means that we are supporting survivors through those SANE exam or even forensic exams. We're providing that information, what to expect, what are the type of tools that are used in the evidence collection process, okay? And then, of course, explaining their rights, okay? So let them know about the emergency contraception options, the right to be able to prevent STIs, that follow-up care, okay? So when it comes to medical advocacy, even if a survivor says, well, I don't want to report, that's okay. You can still receive medical services, okay? They have the right to do that, whether they report or not, okay? When it comes to legal advocacy, they do have that right to have a court accompaniment. So this means you're going with them. Sometimes we provide transportation to the court if they do need that as well, by providing that emotional and the procedural support throughout the process. This may be walking them through or supporting them with protective orders, okay? It may be supporting them if the county attorneys or the DA decided to actually prosecute, and then they may want accompaniment throughout the process of their trial. Okay, so we can provide that court accompaniment. Explain what their legal rights are. Okay, so helping them navigate. Okay, you have the right to, and we'll go over this a little bit later, to obtain a protective order if you do feel it's needed for yourself, right? You have the right to ask those questions. You have the right to participate in victim impact statements. We're going to explain that a little later too. And then, of course, what are the prosecution's options? So they have the right to be informed about those legal rights, okay? They also have the right to have accompaniment to police interviews and then helping them understand what those rights are. Perhaps if a survivor doesn't feel comfortable answering a question, they have the right to not respond, okay? So just being able to walk them through what those rights are. When it comes to crisis advocacy, of course, we do have a 24-hour hotline. So if anything, so you would explain to them our hotline procedures, that here's a number that you can call if you have any questions or if you need any referrals, by offering that immediate crisis intervention. You can discuss safety planning. Okay, so connecting survivors to shelters or even outreach support or other crisis resources that are available within their community. And then, of course, mental health referrals. Okay, so that may mean finding somewhere that's trauma informed. This may mean them going to Central County Services, other mental health hospitals. Perhaps they have insurance, and then walking them through finding a mental health provider or even just a PCM. So there are different ways on how we can support them through medical, legal, and crisis services. So survivor-centered advocacy has certain principles that we have to hit at the core of our advocacy. We have to understand that survivors must always be in control of their choices at every step of the process, okay? Advocacy should be guided by what their needs are, okay, not the advocate's assumptions, okay? Your role is to inform, not influence their decisions, okay? So when we're talking about that trauma-informed approach, we have to recognize how trauma challenges and changes a survivor, what the reactions can look like. Remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to trauma, how their emotions and their decision-making capabilities, okay? Sometimes survivors do utilize flight or freeze, okay? Or they may have never had the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. So providing them with the option that, hey, this is what you want to do, can be very overwhelming for them, okay? So it's important to provide that emotional and physical safety. So creating that safe environment, letting them know like, hey, you have these rights, okay? I want to make sure, do you feel comfortable, okay? You can stop. You do not have to answer if you don't feel comfortable, okay? And it's very important to avoid re-traumatization if possible. So respect their boundaries and their autonomy and their choices, okay? The key understanding is advocacy should always be survivor-led and trauma-informed. So when it comes to crime victims compensation, remember this is one of the programs that you will be explaining to survivors with hospital accompaniment. But crime victims compensation is a program, it's a state program. Most states do have crime victims compensation programs. So even if the program or the victimization happened in a different state, they do have the right to either apply for crime victims in Texas or apply for crime victims in the state that it occurred, unless that state that it occurred does not have a crime victims program. So that's why they still have the option, if they do become residents and they are in Texas, to still get it from Texas, even if the victimization didn't happen here, okay? But it is a financial assistance programs that can help survivors cover certain costs or reimbursements related to their sexual assault. Okay. Understand that crime victims compensation is for all victims of crimes. Okay. So it's not just domestic violence, it's not just sexual assault. You could have been mugged, you could have been stabbed, maybe you were in a robbery and you were injured. Like it varies. Okay. Now, advocates such as yourselves, okay, our role is to provide information about the crime victims compensation programs and the benefits, okay? We also help assist survivors with completing those applications, okay? The outreach department, we do have a portal where we do submit them, so it makes the process a lot easier. We're able to check in, get updates, verify, as well as the program. And then, of course, if they are approved at 100%, help them walk them through that claims process, what that looks like. So crime victims compensation can cover a lot of things. The main things that a lot of survivors use is, of course, covering those medical expenses. So sometimes survivors, you may get a call or something and they just, oh, I'm not sure I want to go to the hospital because I don't have medical insurance. Okay. So they can cover the forensic exams. Okay. So those are covered. So they don't have to worry about receiving a bill trying to get a forensic exam. Okay. They could also cover counseling related to their victimization. Okay. So they can receive counseling services. A lot of survivors on a lot of the CVC, they do want to apply for relocation or housing assistance, okay, especially if it's needed for safety. Perhaps if they were living with the offender is now incarcerated, and of course, the offender knows where they live. So, trying to walk them through that process so they have the availability to get approved and have that program to be able to help them to move into another place. Okay. It can provide up to $5,000 worth of relocation assistance. Okay. And we'll go over a little deeper into all of the amounts that they're entitled to. Okay. If they qualify. Crime victims compensation can also cover transportation costs. So this can mean if they need assistance with transportation to legal court offices, to and from their home, medical accompaniments or medical appointments if it's related to their trauma or their victimization as well. And it could also cover legal fees for protective orders and other victim-related legal needs. Okay. So when it comes to follow-up advocacy, especially when you're working with crime victims, understand that survivors are going to need ongoing support. Okay. So it's not just a one-time, we just explain to you, hey, you have all of these programs that can help you, getting brief information. A lot of the information that we are providing, especially if you're working with them with hospital accompaniment, they are taking in a lot of information. Okay. We do not expect survivors to remember everything or not remember. They have just been victimized. So a lot of times all of their mind is just focused on that. So when we're giving a lot of information, it's important to understand that there is supportive services beyond the initial advocacy. Okay. Understand that healing is not linear, okay? It is a process, okay? So advocacy doesn't just stop after they receive an exam or even if they go through with a court case or even the trial. It does not just automatically, oh, okay, the perpetrator was held, accountable for their actions and sentenced, and I'm healed. It doesn't work like that, okay? Advocates need to make sure that we are providing that continued reassurance, resources, and referrals. So how can we provide that support? Of course, through our outreach team, we can check in on our survivor, okay? All right, and their well-being. We provide updated information on their legal cases, of course, if we have a consent release to be able to get that information or even perhaps medical follow-up also with that consent. Help survivors find access to certain counseling and other community support that they may need. Be cultural specific. Sometimes survivors may be interested in things that pertain to their culture, okay, and in ways that they may feel supported, okay, as well as educating them on additional resources and self-care options. So to tidy up advocacy, understand, remember that advocacy is the heart of the Rape Crisis Center. So it is the heart of what we do, okay? It is survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and of course, consent-based, okay? Your role is to provide emotional support, practical assistance, and help them navigate those systems, okay? Your goal is to empower, not influence, a survivor's choices. And of course, advocacy does not end after a crisis response. Ongoing support matters. Okay, so now we're going to go through all of the legal resources and remedies. The first thing we're going to know is in the packet that you do support survivors is a documentation on Crime Victims' Bill of Rights. So it's important for advocates to know what those rights are so that you can inform survivors of what they are, okay? So the Victims' Bill of Rights is a set of legal protections for victims of crime, ensuring that they receive fair treatment and participation during the criminal justice process, okay? These rights apply to all victims of crime, so remember, but there are specific provisions specifically for sexual assault survivors. Some rights are automatic, but others can be requested by the victim. And some they also extend to minors as well that are victims of crime, and they can be exercised by their parent or guardian. And then, of course, the enforcement comes, like violations do not lead to financial liability, but can be corrected through court intervention. So what are some of the rights that sexual assault survivors? So this is important for you to know. Number one, of course, they do have the right to a medical forensic exam or a SANE exam within 96 hours if requested, okay? If a survivor victimization happened beyond that time frame, we can still do a scheduled forensic interview to discuss the victimization at Baylor, Scott and White and Temple or even McLean's, okay? So keep in mind that this is mainly for us to forensic nurses to be able to collect evidence, DNA off the victim's body, whether that's internal or external, okay? They do have the right to evidence disclosure. So this means that they have the right to receive information about the evidence collection process, the investigation, where they are in that, the analysis, unless disclosing that information will actually interfere in the investigation process. The same thing as well as the DNA testing notification too, okay? If that happens where the information that they are asking for will interfere, they should be informed on the approximate date on when it will be released, okay? So they have the right to updates about the DNA testing, when they actually test their rape kit, if there was a match, especially if the survivor was sexually assaulted by a stranger or an unknown person, okay? They have the right to protective order. So they have the right to request a prosecutor to file a protective order on their behalf. They also have the right to file one pro se on behalf of themselves. This also includes child survivors where parents or guardians can actually request a protective order on behalf of that child survivor. They do also have the right to HIV or AIDS counseling, okay, and testing following an assault. It's important to note that during the SANE exam, they are given information about the counseling, but the actual testing cannot happen at the time of the SANE exam, but it can happen after that exam. So the rights of victims is actually written in our Texas Constitution, okay? It is under Article 1, subsection 30, where constitutionally, survivors do have the right to fair treatment and respect. So they have the right to have their dignity, their privacy, and being fair in all legal proceedings, okay? They do have the right to be protected from the accused. So that may be like the protective orders, or reasonable safety measures, or if they do have to go to court for a protective order and the offender is there as well, when the court is over, they may release the survivor 15 or 20 minutes early and keep the offender in the courtroom so that they do have a safe way to get out of the parking lot so they're not being followed or anything like that. They do have the right to notification of all court proceedings, so the right to be informed of when the next hearing or other legal actions that are happening. They have the right to be present at those court proceedings. So they have the right to attend unless their testimony would be affected. Okay. So if they are supposed to testify on the stand, there may be certain areas where they won't be able to be allowed in the courtroom, but that can be that will be discussed with the prosecutor. They have the right to have a consultation with the prosecutors and have the understanding of the right to confer and discuss the case with the prosecutor. And then, of course, they have the right to restitution. So this is the right to seek financial reimbursement for those crime-related damages. So what are some general rights of crime victims? So this is actually found in Article 56.02 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, and they do have the right to protection from harm. So law enforcement must provide safety from those threats, okay? So sometimes that may mean if there's a situation that happened at the home and it's heightened, a law enforcement can actually remove someone from the home if safety is a risk, okay? They do have the right for bail considerations. So judges must consider the victim's safety when they are setting bail for the offender. Okay. Survivors have the right to be informed of those hearings and the case status. They do have the right to actually speak when it comes to the sentencing on how that victimization has impacted them mentally, emotionally. Okay. And they can provide that input. And this actually goes into how sentencing may be for the offender. They have the right to, of course, receive crime victims' compensation, and they have the right to be notified of any parole hearings. So before they are released, they have the right to know when those hearings are, attend those hearings, and give input whether the survivor feels that they should be granted parole or not. They do also have the right to have a separate waiting area, so a secure place before they actually are testifying in court. And the key thing is to make sure that understand that victims have these legal protections to make sure that they remain safe if they do want to participate in actually what the compensation policies are within the justice system. So when we break down the parole and sentencing rights, so they do have rights in several different areas. Now, of course, they have the right to put input before they actually sentence. We talked about how they can share how the crime impacted their life. They have the right to the parole board, so providing statements before the parole makes decisions. And of course, very important, they have the right to be notified if an offender is going to be released, okay, through our victim notification system, okay? Victims can request those updates on when an offender is going to be released. They can set it up where they can receive text messages, emails, phone calls. This also means if the offender gets transferred to another jail, they have the right to be informed on the whereabouts of the offender if he is incarcerated, okay? They do have the right to other protections to include notifying their employers. So prosecutors can also inform the employers of the victims that they need to attend court, okay? They also have the right to receive their property if they did give their property during the investigation, once it's no longer needed as evidence. And they do have the option of mediation between victims and offenders through the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. So if they are incarcerated and they have the option to request mediation, they do have victim advocates through TDCJ. When it comes to minors, of course, a minor's rights can be exercised by a parent or guardian, okay? When it comes to family violence cases, judges must consider the victim impact when they're granting certain continuances, okay? If safety is a measure, constantly continuing a situation, is that going to put the survivor or the child in harm's way, okay? When it comes to specifically capital murder cases, so this is like murder of a peace officer, a judge, if you kill multiple people, maybe through a burglary or something like that, or if they're murder of a child that was under the age of 6, or special provisions if they are under the age of 15, or if you actually murder someone else also while you're incarcerated. That is what's considered capital felony cases, okay? But there are specific rights that do apply to include receiving written explanations about those victim outreach efforts by the defense. And of course, no contact from the victims, from the defense outreach specialist without written consent when it comes to minors, okay, or special cases. So the victim impact statement is what is used to detail how the crime impacted a victim's life, okay, whether emotionally, physically, and financially. Um, Advocates in the outreach, we do support survivors when completing these statements. And this helps them, of course, we say, after the criminal procedures, they the county attorney victim assistance coordinators will provide the in-text statement form. We do have the form as well, and help walk them through how they can detail how that crime has impacted them. Okay. So once it's completed, it is actually given and reviewed by the prosecutor and given to the judge before the sentencing happened. Okay. They have to consider the victim's statement when it comes to plea deals or even parole hearings. And it is also included in the offender's parole file, okay? So to tidy up, when we're talking about the crime victims' rights in Texas, understanding that victims have the right to safety and protection, okay? They do have the right to participate, to attend court, receive notifications when it comes, or even confer with prosecutors. They have the right to receive financial support through maybe restitution or even compensation for damages. And then they have the right to participate in the parole process or even receive case updates, okay? Additionally, when it comes to sexual assault survivors, they do have the right to receive a forensic exam and DNA testing and provide updates. They have the right to protective orders, counseling, and medical testing, to include HIV testing as well. Okay. So understanding that victims' rights do exist in order to protect, support them, and empower them through the criminal justice process. Okay, so when we're breaking down crime victims' compensation, so understand that crime victims' compensation in Texas was actually established in 1979. And it is actually funded by court cost and probation fees paid by convicted offenders. So this is not something that is grant funded, but rather based on the fees that offenders pay, whether through probation, okay? To be able to, as a method of restitution, okay? It can provide financial assistance to victims of violent crimes. So the purpose is actually to assist those victims with certain expenses related to the crime to ensure they receive financial relief, receive certain medical counseling, or maybe other costs that they may need, okay? The biggest thing with crime victims compensation is to understand that it does act as a payer of last resort. And we're going to kind of go over that, meaning that they do have to exhaust all other resources before they are given crime victims compensation. Okay. So what are some costs that can be compensated for survivors? Of course, medical expenses. So if they receive hospital bills. So we know that the forensic exam is covered, but perhaps follow-up care uh, for certain injuries, especially if it was an emergency detailing certain internal injuries where now surgery is needed, and that follow-up care as well. You can supply your hospital bills to have those covered, ambulance fees, and sometimes prescription medication that relates to their victimization. They can provide mental health counseling, so that crisis counseling for therapy for victims and their immediate family. So crime victims compensation is not just for the victim, but you also have what's considered a claimant. So that means that the survivor, as well as, let's say, their children, okay, maybe they were impacted, they can receive benefits as well, okay? They can cover burial or funeral costs, okay, if the victim died. So again, that can help cover those expenses, but even being a family member of a victim of a crime, perhaps that family, the victim died, and so the family member can be eligible for crime victims compensation as well. They can cover lost wages or even loss of support. So maybe a survivor wasn't able to go to work because of their injuries, or maybe the offender was like the breadwinner in the relationship, but now that they're incarcerated, they have lost that support. So they can provide financial assistance to help that as well. They can cover travel costs. So that's travel to and from medical treatment or even certain court proceedings. They can cover attorney fees for certain legal assistance for filing claims if the claim is approved. So keep in mind, everything is what they could be compensated for. Survivors do have to be approved at 100% to receive all of it. There are certain things they may be approved and some things they can be denied for, okay? But understand that these are all the eligible things that can be covered. They can cover crime victims, crime scene cleanup. So maybe the cleanup after a violent crime, okay? Replacement of certain personal items. So maybe their clothing or bedding was taken as evidence. They can put a claim in for that and get compensated. And then, of course, relocation or moving expenses. So it's not just rent, deposit, sometimes the utility deposits, pet fees. They can cover the U-Haul, the gas, the mileage. Okay, so there's a lot. There's an entire form on relocation that my advocates we do in outreach. We do a lot of crime victims compensation claims, but understanding that there are a lot of different entities when it comes to moving expenses that they are eligible if, of course, they are approved, especially if the crime occurred in the victim's home, or perhaps if the survivor or if the offender actually knows where the survivor lives and maybe they were stalking them. Okay. So, one of the things that crime victims compensation does not cover is property damage or loss. So, if something was stolen or property was damaged, or like maybe the offender punched a hole in the wall or broke the door, those things are not covered under crime victims compensation. So, the main thing is to understand that it does help cover crime related expenses, but it doesn't compensate for property loss. So, what is compensation? What do those limits look like? So, the total compensation limits for eligible victims can be up to $50,000. Okay. So keep in mind, this includes medical expenses, medical bills, things of that nature. There are certain, like it's up to $5,000 for relocation. So there's certain things that they do have caps for, but in total, they can receive up to $50,000 for certain expenses. And in certain other cases, they can receive an additional 25,000 to 75,000 with certain catastrophic injuries. For instance, if they ended up being totally or even having a permanent disability, maybe they were shot, a few times and they were paralyzed, So there are certain things that they can provide special provisions to extend that $50,000. And that could include lost wages. So perhaps they were working, but because of the crime that happened, now they have a long-term disability. It can cover prosthetics or even rehabilitation or even certain home modifications. Okay. So this is just a key of a brief introduction into what type of the amounts when it comes to being compensated under crime victims compensation. So crime victims compensation is, I mentioned, it is the payer of last resort. That means that if a survivor does have health insurance, okay, this can be Medicaid, Medicare, they can have their own through their employer, okay, they will actually charge those insurances before they can utilize CVC, okay? So say, for instance, if a client needs to go back to the hospital for follow-up care, okay, their insurance will cover that, but if there's anything that the insurance does not cover, that's when CVC can pick up the remaining balance, okay? To include all insurance. So if you get injured or somebody rams into you or something like that during a heist or something, right? Your insurance will cover that. Anything that's remaining, perhaps they could have covered the everything else, right? So CVC only steps in after all other funding resources have been exhausted, okay? But even given that, understand that it's our role to coordinate those resources for the best financial support to ensure that survivors actually receive the maximum financial relief to help them. Okay. It does not replace other financial resources. So understand that you might be covered under, let's just say CVC, but A survivor may be getting evicted, okay? Is not going to pay past rent. You know, those are where you actually are looking for other housing or housing assistance programs to be able to supplement those costs, okay? But in certain cases, if they do need to move to a new place, you know, it can supplement that when there's no other options that are left. So when it comes to eligibility, I briefly talked about it, of course, who can apply? Of course, victims. So these are individuals that actually suffered bodily injury, perhaps emotional trauma, or even death due to a violent crime. Family members, so immediate relatives that may need counseling or support can be eligible. Public safety professionals, so maybe individuals that were injured or killed while aiding a victim, or even law enforcement. They can legal caregivers. So those that actually assume financial responsibility for crime-related expenses, they can be eligible, as well as Texas residents that were victimized in other states. Okay. So one of the eligibility, the biggest thing with CVC is that, unfortunately, when it comes to survivors, they do have to report the crime to law enforcement. So that's the biggest caveat with CVC, that of course they do have these rights that are available to them, but they do have to actually file a police report. And some survivors don't want to file a report, okay? So our job, again, is to inform them of what these programs are. You know, they must make that choice and understanding that, okay, if I do want to apply for CVC, I do have to report it to law enforcement, okay? They also have to cooperate with the authorities. So cooperation, they must cooperate. So if an investigator needs to talk to them about the case, they do have to be cooperative. They can't dodge their calls, because that can possibly, if they do, let's say that they were approved, revoke it because they weren't cooperative in that investigation, okay? The victim must also not share responsibility of the crime. So you can't say that you got injured while assisting the offender on robbing a bank. Okay. All right. So you wouldn't be eligible for crime victims if you actually were a part of the problem, right? So in addition, sexual assault survivors receiving forensic exam can receive that emergency room cost coverage without reporting to the police. So understand that the medical portion of receiving that, regardless of the fact if they do want to report or not, when it comes to sexual assault survivors, that specific cost can be covered. Okay. All right. So that's the only special provision, not the only special, but that's one of the special provisions for sexual assault survivors that do not want to report to the police, but their emergency room costs can be covered. So of course, how do they apply? Okay, so they can get applications at the hospital, law enforcement agencies, crime victims, liaisons through the police departments, because every police department has a crime victims liaison, whether they have a funded position or they have assigned. So let's say, for instance, if it is out of county, perhaps the sheriff may be that appointed person that works with survivors as their liaison. Okay. Domestic violence organizations like FIC. So they can apply with an advocate here, whether they're in shelter or whether they're in outreach. Of course, and we actually submit majority of the crime victims compensation forms online. Okay, it is much faster. There are paper applications, but the process goes a lot faster when you do apply online. Okay. Here's the contact information. Of course, this is a program that is funded through the Office of the Attorney General, as their address, their phone number. If you have any questions regarding the claims process, if you are assisting it with your clients, okay. There's also application assistance where they can actually call to walk people through that process through a toll-free hotline as well. So CVC can help and support, like we said, just provide that support. So we kind of talked about this, but this is just a brief overview of that financial relief that they can, and advocates can help educate them about those benefits. Okay. All right. So the address confidentiality is the last thing we're going to shoot through real quick. Okay. So the address confidentiality program, this as well is a privacy protection program that is administered through the Office of the Attorney General as well, OAG. And it is available to survivors of sexual assault, family violence, and stalking within Texas. Okay. And what it does is it provides a substitute address, which is a PO box for survivors to use instead of actually using their home address. Okay. So, and it also helps to protect survivors' location while still allow them to participate in certain legal and civil matters. Okay. The legal foundation is this is authorized through the Texas Code of Criminal Justice Procedure, Chapter 56, subsection C. Okay. So understand the biggest thing when you are explaining this to survivors that this program is to have an extra added layer of security by just basically keeping their address confidential. Okay, so why is it important? So understand that when it comes to privacy protection, that sometimes, especially through certain public records, survivors' names may still appear in public records due to legal requirements, okay? Defendants do have that constitutional right to know the survivor's identity, meaning that if someone is trying to file a report against the offender does have the right to know who it is, right? However, they do not have the right to know where the survivor lives. Okay, they have the right to know who is actually filing, but not where they live. So the program helps to hide survivors' actual home address, okay? And it does that by preventing perpetrators from being able to track their location. So the way that it works is they apply for the program. There's a paper application as well. So once they apply and they are approved, they'll receive a card, okay? And so they are provided with that PO box address. They can take that card actually down and change it on their driver's license, okay? That address can be used in court records. So when a survivor, say they're pulled over by the police and the police sees that their address is actually a PO box on their ID, okay, they would know that they actually are part of the address confidentiality program. So those are certain things that can help. They can be put on school registration forms. It can, but so basically they're giving a PO box address in Austin. And so the Austin main hub will actually forward it actually to their physical address. Okay. So survivors do not have to go all the way to Austin to pick up mail or anything like that. Okay. But they're giving an address. It'll say a PO box number, whatever, Austin, Texas, whatever. When mail is coming, so say they send it to that PO box, the post office has on record confidentially their address and they forward their mail to their address. Okay. Now, keep in mind that this cannot be used for utility providers. So, of course, you know, if you're signing up for utilities, they need to know what address to actually turn your utilities on. They can't use it for banks or even certain lenders, so they do have to have their physical address for those things. In addition to that, they cannot forward packages. So only first class mail. So if you're buying a whole bunch of Amazon, okay, they will not forward packages using that. So keep in mind, they probably have to use like Amazon Locker or something else if they're trying to get packages, only first class mail. Now, the direction they do, the PO box is valid for 3 years. They do have the option to renew it upon request. Okay, so they can stay in that program as long as they're approved. So again, enrolling in that program, they can file an application. The application does have to be certified by a victim advocate or victim advocacy program. Okay. Of course, this can also include, you know, the crime victims liaison, but it does have to be approved. So survivors cannot just apply for this program by themselves. Okay. They do have to be with a victim assistance counselor. Okay. Where they designate the Texas Attorney General as an agent. So they receive that process and legal notices on behalf of survivors. And so survivors have to reside at an undisclosed address. So they must relocate to an address unknown to the perpetrator. So you can't like, hey, you were living with the perpetrator and the perpetrator is incarcerated. You apply for address confidentiality in the same home that you were sharing with the survivor. Okay. All right. Because that defeats the purpose of trying to keep your address confidential. Okay. So of course, the benefits are to enhance that safety and security. Okay. Reduces the risk of harassment or re-victimization and also support survivors in their independence. Okay. It also, when it comes to the legal system, it ensures survivors can still be reached for certain official matters, you know, through the OAG. So even though they may put that, they can also use, and we'll talk about pseudonym later on, but where they can still be reached for official matters, which is important because they need to know where to send those addresses and those locations of those notices for certain court things. They can also provide a structured process for that privacy protection, okay, and help victims safely move forward. The key thing in understanding that address confidentiality program can help hide their address, but it is not a witness protection program. They're two different things, okay? All right. It is not a complete anonymity program. It does not prevent all risk. Okay. So make sure that survivors still have to make sure they take additional personal security measures. That could be, maybe getting cameras around your home. That could be getting a protective order, moving from a location where your offender knows where you live, It is not applicable for all financial institutions. So understand that they may have a separate mailing options for certain banking needs. Okay. It does maintain confidentiality, but understand that survivors still need to be cautious where they share their actual address to, okay? And use the P.O. box whenever possible for all official matters, okay? Only inform trusted individuals what their real address is, okay? So, final thoughts on the conversation with address confidentiality. This program is designed to help survivors maintain their privacy and their safety. It's a very simple process. They do have to get, the application does have to be approved. The way that there is the brief application, and then there's a checklist that survivors do also have to check off to understand all of those different parameters of the program. So for instance, like, hey, it's only going to forward first class mail. They have to initial that they understand this is not a witness protection program. There's a checklist that they do have to sign as well. And so we submit both of those forms and mail it into the OAG office, and then they will actually reply back to them whether they were approved and get that card in the mail so they can start using that address. And they are also given that P.O. box address at that time. Okay. It is a very valuable tool, and it can provide, it is a very underutilized program, okay, that a lot of survivors may not know, especially if they're not connected to a domestic violence agency, okay, but it is there to help them remain safe as best as possible. All right. Well, thank you guys so much today. I really appreciate it. We are actually finished. I will be sending out an email with the YouTube link with all of the recorded webinars, the other ones that actually will be on demand. So I plan to have that out this week for you guys. Okay. If you have any questions, or if based on the schedule that I kind of gave you guys, that you are not going to be here, please let me know. I do know a few of you that I do need to make up some of the trainings for. I will get with you offline, okay? But if you have any questions about anything that we are discussing today in any of our trainings, please just let me know, okay? Thank you guys so much. All right, and all the hard work that you do for our survivors. I appreciate it. You have a great day.